Royal greetings, everyone. Welcome to the first edition of the SARKO podcast. Like we had promised that we're going to be starting our podcast to talk about what SARKO is. Today we're starting that sequence of actually talking about it. As we all know, the history of South Africa was predominantly a country that was the Khoisan and predominantly the what we call today the black community. And in 1652, the white settlers were actually on their way to India to buy spices, and they were actually needed water. It was a water break for them. And when they were on the water break, they then realized that South Africa is such a beautiful country, and they decided that they are going to settle. Indeed, they did settle, and we know they were not. Jan van Riebeeck, with his dromedaries, were not the first settlers to actually come into South Africa. There has been white people that came before, and they couldn't settle because of the wars that were there. But eventually, in 1652, they actually settled. And it didn't take them long. Within 10 years, the war broke out. The very first war that broke out was the First Khoi War of 1659. Then in 1659, the war broke out between the Khoisan and the white people, and the war was all about land. It was about land, and it was camouflaged around cattle. So the issue of white people actually stealing our wealth from us has been there for quite a long time. If you look at history, most of the wars would start with cattle. I'll make an example with the Langerberg War that broke out in 1897 between King Galeshewe, King Toto, and King Janki in the Northern Cape. Actually, the war started with King Galeshewe. And the issue there was that the white people were saying his cattle had a disease and he needed to kill all of his cattle. And he refused to do that. And then the war broke out. And unfortunately, at that time, our kings didn't have guns, and white people did have guns. So they conquered him, and he ran to his uncle, who is King Toto, to actually get help from him. And the white people demanded. They followed through and demanded King Toto to surrender and give up and give King Galeshewe to them. And King Toto said, no, that won't happen. And the war broke out again. And King Janki joined them. And it was a war that was called the Langerberg War of 1897. And they lost the war, and they were captured, and they were taken to Robben Island. So when politicians and historians says Robben Island, the first people, political prisoners in Robben Island were actually kings, it's very true, because even in 1897 they were captured and taken to Robben Island. Our famous politicians started going to Robben Island way later. The people that actually were the first to go into Robben Island as political prisoners were kings. And it was the war of land. So these wars were happening from 1659 up until 1906 with the Mbambata Rebellion. The Mbambata Rebellion of 1906 with the king of the Zulu was the last war. At that time, because the priests, pastors, priests, they actually were able to read and write because the missionaries had taught them how to read and write. The priests approached the kings to say to them, hey, there's enough bloodshed. We cannot continue losing people at the rate that we're losing them. There is another way of actually getting the land back without the community dying. And because the work of a king is to take care of the community, the kings were listening to what the priests were saying. And they said, okay, fine, because you guys can read and write, we are going to give you a mandate. Go and take that action that you are saying can bring back our land, which is the negotiations. And the first liberal movement was formed. The first liberal movement was formed in 1912. It was formed by kings, and kings were giving mandate to the priests to bring back the land. It's been very unfortunate that the priests didn't carry the mandate through to this day. If you look at the history of the liberation movement, from 1912 up until the late President O.R. Tambo, all of them were priests. The late President O.R. Tambo was the first president of the liberation movement to be a non-priest. He was the first one. All of them, they were priests. And it was unfortunate that to this day, the mandate that was given was not carried forward. In 1994, we had a two-thirds majority. The two-thirds majority gave us the liberation and the freedom to change the acts and the legislature of the country. One of the acts that was supposed to have been changed in 1994, when we got the two-thirds majority, was the Native Land Act of 1913. The Native Land Act of 1913, which came into place on the 19th of June in 1913, was only saying black people cannot own land, cannot rent land, cannot purchase land in South Africa. And it further said black people can only own 7% of the land. And 87%, it was 7%, and later it came to 13% with the amendment. The amendment made it 13%, so which literally meant that the natives of the country, they are only allowed to occupy or own only 13% of the land, and 87% should go to the white people. It further said black people, if they do own land, they're not allowed to can actually rent land out to other people. Meaning it was an economic suppression, that even if you do have land, maybe you want to rent out your land, you have a farm, maybe you want to rent out your farm so that a person can come and produce from your farm, you are not allowed to do that, because that would give you economic power, because you're going to get rent by renting out your land. When you lease it out, you get paid rent. So it was a seriously strategic move to make sure that the black community will never ever achieve economic freedom. Now, the liberation movement failed to change that clause. And it was the sole mandate that was given to the liberation movement to deliver. And they failed to do that. Now, fast forward, in 2021, we then decided to, because the white people had actually put in a case that they will not give land without compensation. Now, this case was brought to court in 2012. We are in 2023 today, and nothing is happening. Because of that case, you cannot submit a land claim. No land claim is being processed. No land claim is being finalized. So the whole land claim process has been put on hold since 2012. And now this is a strategy that the SARKO use, because this is what they do. They go to court, they open up a case, and then everything becomes standstill, and then they continue with their business as normal. They continue farming, they continue mining, they continue living their lives normally as if nothing is happening. Yet, on the other hand, the black community is unable to claim their land. Then we took a resolution, because we said, okay, fine, This is a strategy that the white settlers are using. Let us also use the same strategy. Let us form an NPO. And in this NPO, we are going to recruit kings and queens and the monarchs and the royal houses to come on board. And we also go and open up a civil case against the state. A case that says the land was taken from us. We were killed. We all know the history that some of our uh, heroes, they died and their heads were cut off, and we still don't have their heads to this day. We still need those heads. They're sitting somewhere in the UK where we are waiting for our heads to come back. So the land, we were not compensated. They classify it as forced removals to make it politically correct. So if we were to use the term that is being used by the political arena, and we say forced removals, we were forcefully removed from our land. Our ancestors were forcefully removed. So we are going to go there and say, no, we want our land without compensation, because we were never compensated. Never. So we want our land without compensation. Then the government would find itself, on the one hand, it is the white settlers who are saying, we won't give a land without compensation. And on the other hand is the kings and queens and the monarchs and their community says, we're not going to give compensation. We want our land without compensation. Unfortunately for us, when we went for legal consultation, we were told by our advocates that we've lost the case even before we start because of the acts, the Native Land Act of 1913. It says if your land was taken before 1913, you are not eligible to claim. Only the people that their land was taken from 1913 coming forward to date, they are the people that can claim. All the kings and queens and monarchs, all their land was taken before 1913. Then we had to go back to the drawing board. We had to go back to the drawing board and say, what is it that we are going to do now? Because the plan of actually going to court is not going to work for us. Now we then decided to say, okay, fine. We had to go for a referendum as a country, and we went for the first national elections in 1994 on the 27th of April. Now, we got rid of the apartheid regime through voting, and we introduced the democratic country that we're operating under today. So we are in the system, a democratic system. So the only way for us to bring back the democratic monarchy system is for us to go back and vote to the drawing boards. Now we agreed that we are for a democratic monarchy, and then we registered SARKO with the IEC. We were registered on the 21st of October 2021, 20th of October 2021, and that's when we were registered to participate in the elections of the country. So we participated in the 2021 local elections, and we got good results, and it made us understand that communities still respect their kings and queens and royals. What we need to understand, where we are right now in South Africa, our community needs stability. We do not have stability in our country. If we look at development, Stats SA has shown that South Africa is the only country that is actually going backwards in terms of development. All countries are improving. And how they calculate their development is the gap between the rich and the poor. If the gap is too big, then it means the country is going backwards. If the gap is narrowing down, then the country is moving forward. So South Africa is the only country in the world that is literally going back because the gap between the rich and the poor is getting bigger and bigger. And we can understand why that is so. We have a democratic system. We're a democratic country. Our politicians sit in the office for 5 years, and then after 5 years, it's new leadership. Politicians are there to loot, to make sure that they live a better lifestyle. So when they come into office, they only have 5 years to make sure that they're set up for a lifetime. So forget about development. Now, if you look at the monarchy, the democratic monarchy, a monarch is there for a lifetime. Never will you find a royal house diminishing. Because even if the king or a queen that's sitting on the throne dies, there is a successor. So once the royal house is there, it's there for a lifetime, which is the stability that our community needs. Because royals and monarchs are there, their sole mandate is to take care of the community. Politicians, their sole mandate is to make sure that they live a better life. Now, it is one of the advantages of actually moving towards a democratic monarchy, because the monarchy is going to bring in stability within our communities, which is the stability that is needed. It's going to bring in the development, because number two, if you look at the divisions that we have amongst our community, it is actually brought in by politicians. For an example, if in your local area where you stay, the party that actually won the local elections is the one that takes decisions on projects that come in for development. And if you're not a member of that political organization, then you do not get opportunities of employment. There's division. For you to be able to put food on the table for your children, you must be a member of their ruling party in your area. Whoever that won the elections, whoever that is governing your area, those people are set for the next 5 years. They will be getting projects, they will be doing developments and all that. That is bringing division. But if you look at the monarch, to the monarchy, to the royal house, the community is equal. It doesn't matter whether you are a Christian, a Muslim, a African spirituality, a Sangoma, it doesn't matter. You are a member of that community. It doesn't matter which affiliation. Remember, our constitution and our Bill of Rights says we have the right to freedom of affiliation. So with the monarch, it doesn't matter where you affiliate, because you have the freedom of affiliation. It matters not. You are a member of their community. So if a project comes and 10 people have to be employed, the king or the queen will look at who are the people that are most qualified and with the skills that are needed for that, regardless of their association. So there is no division that you're a Christian or you're a Muslim, therefore you belong to this party, therefore. So all those divisions are brought in by politicians. So if we want to see the divisions that we have within our communities diminish, it will be best for us to bring in a democratic monarchy. If we want to see the gap between the rich and the poor being narrowed, it would be advisable for us to bring in the democratic monarchy. If we want to see developments within our communities, it would be best for us to bring in somebody that will be accountable for the rest of their lives, not someone that is there for 5 years. Whether they deliver or not, they know for a fact in 5 years' time they're out of the office. So it will be wise for us to actually look at these factors and say, what is it that we need as the community right now? Look at the recent example that has happened. In the Eastern Cape, in Mthatha, some priest from an Arab country who had a lot of money bought an airport that was abandoned, renovated the airport, and now he flies in and out of our country at wish. He brings whoever that he wants to bring at any time, freely. Whether he's bringing in drugs into our country, whether he's bringing in weapons in our country, the greatest fear is that it could be weapons and the country could be taken again with a gun. It was taken with a gun from 1652, and now we are facing another hostile takeover of our country. Unless if we stand up and say enough, it's enough, we need to stand up as the community, as the royal houses, as the monarchs. We need to say enough now. The land was not taken from politicians. The land was taken from kings and their communities. The argument that the land must be given back to the government is actually very flawed, because the land was never taken from politicians or the government for that matter. It was taken from kings and their communities. So having said that, I'm going to cut it at this, and we are going to continue and debate some of these issues, some of the clauses that we have in our next series. Thank you very much.